Well, hello, Gothic friends. Welcome to Alice in Gothic Land, a place where we talk about all things Gothic. We talk about communication. We talk about overcoming your fears. And today, this is session 5. So, we've already done a whole week, and this is the last session for today. We're going to have another week, so we'll have another 5 days, but we're going to have a break. So Saturday and Sunday, there's not going to be live because I'm going to take a break to think about what we've been talking about, your questions, and then we'll come back again on Monday, same time. Right, I hope you're enjoying this series, and the purpose of doing this is to bring some light to the knowledge of what the Gothic is, what is Gothic literature, how did we go from Gothic literature to the Gothic mode, how can this change you, how can it transform you, how can it help you. And this is my intention, to bring light for you to know what the origins of the Gothic literature are and to see how this can help you in your everyday lives. So I hope you're enjoying it, and today we're going to be looking into something very, very interesting, not very easy to talk about, but I think you're gonna like it, and I think it's gonna bring the extra information that is gonna start complementing what we have seen from the beginning until now, and this is gonna explain what we have been doing until the recent years, from the 50s until our days. So we have two remaining periods, but that doesn't mean that there are more things we can subcategorize as well. So you're going to see why. Okay, the levels, like the same Gothic itself, the boundaries between one stage and the other are not so clear, because we can never say for different periods of time. You can never say it starts and it finishes there, as you saw, for example, with Emilia Pardo Bazán, that the work started in the Victorian period, but she still also had works that continued later on after the Victorian period, because of the period of time the people live and the production of the work as well. Okay, so the goal, as I said to you, my goal here is to bring transformation, and today we're going to be looking into the horrors that the Second World War created. And among those, we find, as you can imagine, we have the Second World War. Yeah, we talked yesterday about the First World War, and we made a reference to The Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, and we said that she somehow collects this idea of the consequences in the mind of the consequences of the war, sorry, in people's minds. And she goes to the home environment again. She goes to, hello Sylvia. Look, I have to say something. Sylvia is one of the most wonderful people you can imagine. She's my oracle. I call her my oracle. She's my spiritual guide, and I hope she can more or less understand what I'm saying. But she's fantastic, and one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because she told me that this will be great for you guys as well. So as my spiritual guide, thank you Silvia for being here. Eres mi guía espiritual, estoy diciendo, supongo que lo has ido entendiendo. Little break for Silvia here. Okay, mi guía espiritual para seguir haciendo literatura gótica online, live. As I was saying, so we go back to English. So with The Lighthouse, with Virginia Woolf, we saw that she brings again the idea of the home, the residues of the war, how the elements of the everyday life things, dying, people dies, people disappear, but the objects stay. So connecting this First World War effects and consequences, we're going to move now to the Second World War. So the other great war. Some of the characteristics of the post-war Gothic that goes between 1945 to thank you, to 1945 to 1950, what we see is that some of the characteristics and some of the consequences of the First World War go also to the Second World War. So what are we going to find here? As you can imagine already, put yourself in our war context. We have death, we have wounded soldiers, psychological traumas like PTSD. That wasn't the original name that we know nowadays. It started with other names. We have grief, we have bereavement, we have all the treatments, psychology, because of the mental issues that the soldiers had to go through and they had to overcome. So we have now, as a consequence of industrialization, we have weapons, more sophisticated ways of killing and dying, and all this is going to bring some characteristics to this period. So as we said a few days ago, we have, on the one hand, we have dystopias and fantasies with dark elements created by George Orwell. This is not quite gothic, but it has these dark elements. Then we also have Mervyn Peake with his gothic Gormenghast, a trilogy. In Spain, we have Carmen Laforet, Nada. She wrote it in 1949, I think it was. And I think I told you it was more for the posterior period. But the fact is that she wrote it in 1949, if I remember right the dates. But then the key figure of this period is H.G. Wells, because he brings to this fin de siècle Gothic of the Second World War the characteristics that we're going to find. And this is something that you can read in Catherine Hawkins' essays. So if the Second World War was from 1939 to 1945, what we're actually talking about is this post-war period, okay? So it's kind of transitory, what we have. The previous period connecting with this second, with this other period, okay? I know it's a little bit confusing, but first, if we don't have historically our dates in the right order, it's very difficult to see how the Gothic plays here. So what we see here now is there's a shift from the terms Gothic as a genre. This is the moment when we go from talking about Gothic literature as a genre to move on to the Gothic as a mode. What is a mode? Is this fact that it appears in a lot of different areas. It appears in everyday life things. It's not just the way we perceive the things that we read, but it's also pretty much in our everyday routines, in our everyday lives. So here I'm going to quote a sentence written by Catherine Hawkins in her article No Man's Land, Elder Gods and Monsters, that she says she set some foundations, some characteristics. And this is what I'm going to connect here, what I'm going to tell you about here. She talks about these from the point of view of the First World War. And I'm going to connect the characteristics of the First World War with the consequences of the Second World War that Sarah Watson talks about in her Urban Gothic of the Second World War. Okay, so using both studies, you're going to see that there are a lot of elements that correlate. So as you can imagine, and you're probably thinking about this, we have trauma, we have nightmares, super important, and probably if you start remembering the elements that we had in the original Gothic, you're going to see that some of these elements already are still there. They don't go, they continue, they amplified. Some of them have changed because of the new technologies, because of the new ways of life, but you're going to see some recurrent things. So now we have nightmares, but they're not the original nightmares that we had regarding the supernatural, for example. What we have are nightmares caused by repetition and recurrent memories of traumatic experiences. And I'm thinking here about the nightmares by the soldiers, okay? So these dreams that are just like a Groundhog Day, they just repeat, and they like it, the traumatic experiences, and they more like a curse, right? And they get the people and the characters in the stories, they get them in these circles, in these this tornado of dark thoughts and dark anxieties and enclosed spaces. They can't even get out of their own heads. So this is very claustrophobic. We have displacement. This also offers temporal dislocation, when the soldiers come back home and they have these nightmares and they don't know whether they've gone back to the past and they're still living in that moment, or if it's in the present, they lose this sense of tense and time. We have doubling, distortion of chronology because of this temporal dislocation. Obviously, from these men, we get identity and subjectivity shift as well. They don't know who they are anymore. They left their homes being a certain type of individual, and they come back completely changed, completely transformed. They have become another person. This is very hard. We have that Sarah Watson, she talks about soldiers stripped from their humanity and turned into murderous automatons. You see, so we have this shift of the people having been one thing and becoming something else. And again, this is very hard. The sleep alterations due to the nightmares. Now we have to go back to the return of the depressed, which is the term that Sigmund Freud used to refer to these men. Again, we have the uncanny. The uncanny, this is something that we've not defined until now. And the uncanny is, for Freud, and I'm going to quote what he said, was the experience of discomfort that is provoked by the reappearance of irrational or infantile imaginings, hitherto surmounted or repressed within the realm of the familiar. So the uncanny is the otherness, is this strange place where we feel weird, it feels awkward. So obviously for the soldiers, the term uncanny is very, very relevant, because everything that was familiar for them in the past before they left to go to the war, now it becomes something that is strange. They need to go back to themselves, but they're not themselves anymore. Can you imagine what this should feel like? And they don't want to talk about it, and they have to go to therapy. They have to go, and they do a lot of at the time to help them. They do different types of therapy, not so much as in psychoanalysis, but as in treatments that could help them overcome these traumas. Also because physically they were wounded, so they come back not just mentally as a different person, but physically their bodies were not the same. Some of them came back with really serious injuries. I can't stop but thinking about I'm going to connect now music with film. Yeah, we're starting also to have the period where we start getting images, and the filmography was already on the table. And I do remember, for example, in really, really hard images of this film. I can't remember the age, should have researched that before doing the live, but it's a film that you can see if you like Metallica. Yeah, I'm a lover of Metallica, follower. There's a song that they actually are, it's based on one of these films, and that talks about the war, talks about Johnny that went to war. I think it's Johnny went to the war. I can't remember. I should look for that, and I might post it in the comments later on. But in this war, we have black and white film. We have this man that has come back from the war, and he's got no arms, he has no legs, and his face is covered. And it's called One, the song. And he's just got his brain, and he's got his memories, and the only way he can talk is by moving his head, doing SOS. And he's asking for help by doing Morse code. So he's asking for the people looking after him, who are the doctors and the nurses. He's asking them to please let him go, let him die. He doesn't want to live like that. So we have a context of something that is not the natural environment for a human being. We have extreme violence, we have extreme deaths, we have a lot of deaths as well. So not just for the soldiers, but imagine also the families, the wives, the children. Is a war is a social issue that covers a lot of people, and is in this case is worldwide. So we have something really gothic, something really dark, and it produced a lot of poetry, and it produced a lot of these writings that have all these characteristics that we're talking about. The settings, if in the original Gothic we had those landscapes that were really dark, they were eerie, they were damp, now we have the setting is the hospital, is the prison, is factories, homes, morgues. We have all these new ways, new contexts. We have the urban environment rather than the landscape and the field and fields. Maybe for the soldiers, well, battling in the field as well, they have both in their heads, but we have all these other places that we didn't have before. So as you can imagine, we're going to find mainly poems and not so well known works, I don't think, but probably we will need to look more in depth to give you specific writers that are really representative of the period. But I didn't find that easy, and what we have is this mixture of poems that are really the most relevant ones. Okay, right. So this is the post-war Gothic. It's not as long as the Victorian Gothic as you saw yesterday, because yesterday it's still here, yeah, because it was super long. You know, Victorian Gothic is a long period of time because Queen Victoria lived for a long time, and it has a lot of characteristics because a lot of things were happening. Now what we have is in this the second part of today, the postmodern Gothic. Okay, so we've talked about the wars, we're moving away, we're redoing the society now, and the postmodern Gothic goes from 1950s plus. And here I would like to do some subdivisions as well, because after the postmodern Gothic, we also have two more labels. I know I lied to you. There's contemporary Gothic that I'm not really sure of the timings because nobody seems to have clear the periods. They all kind of start blending. But we have a contemporary Gothic that I'm gonna dare to say goes from the 1970s to the 1990s. Yeah, more or less. It's not a fixed date, okay? It's not a fixed time, but it goes around that time. And then we have an after Gothic that would be in the 2000s, right? So what do we find? Let's go back to the postmodern Gothic. After the war, we have the post-war Gothic, and the postmodern Gothic is the Gothic of Angela Carter, Mercè Rodoreda in Catalonia, Shirley Jackson with The Haunting of Hill House in 1959. We have production of magazines for the first time, like the Weird Tales in the United States, which is a very important publication, and of the post-war era. Okay, so we have another one that we can put on the post-war area and era. This is something that Aldana highlights in his book regarding horror, a literary history. And what we now have is this group of authors who go back to the story, the folklore, fairy tales, and what they do is they deconstruct these texts in a more contemporary context. So some of the characteristics of these writings are myths, fairy tales. They have a really important and really intense cultural worry about what's going on around culturally. They've got a lot of worries regarding the family. We have identity around sexuality, homosexuality, different tendencies, and now we're starting to speak about them out loud. We're starting to verbalize this and to give them a place in a room. We also have the fears and desires, which is something that is constant. Yes, it's something that it goes throughout all the periods. We also have these strange people. So all of a sudden we're discovering all the people that we didn't consider before. The breaking of conventional boundaries. Yeah, these strange people is because people are starting to speak up their minds and to say who they are. The breaking of conventional boundaries. Yeah, so we're playing, we're pushing the boundaries, we're questioning patriarchal societies. We're starting to say, okay, this is not right, this is wrong. They talk about deceptive appearances, sorry. So things are not what they seem, things are strange. We see something from the outside, but it's something else underneath. And here we have, for example, in the postmodern Gothic, in an article called Postmodern Gothic, sorry, that Nasrullah Mambrol talks about the immersion of a thread of sublime excess. I think this is brilliant because if we were talking about the sublime a couple of days ago, and if you remember, the sublime was this feeling of awe that we have when we are in front of a big mountain or of a landscape that is huge, that we feel really, really tiny, really, really small. And this is this oh, yeah, with the sensation, this feeling of oh. Then now we have this in excess. Okay, everything makes the authors question things and feel really small, and everything else is super big. So as Nasrullah talks about, she describes, is a new darkness of multiple and labyrinth narratives, which in a way they represent our societies. If you think about streets and you think about, for example, think about Barcelona. Barcelona has all the settings. It's all this labyrinthic setting of the city where you have all these blocks and it's like a labyrinth, right? So we have these passages and we have this darkness, but this is again reminds us of the human myths, again to about to be dissolved. They confronted with the uncanny. So this is forcing and pushing the boundaries. This is what Nasrullah talks about as well. So he's pushing and pushing the boundaries all the time. So now you can see more what we have inherited. This is closer to us. If you think, for example, about Shirley Jackson, we also have the ghost. The ghost keeps appearing, okay? But in this case, what we have is a ghost that is questioned, that is analyzed also psychologically, and the person who perceives the ghost is also analyzed psychologically. Everything has to have this logic and it has to have this reason, which it reminds us of what I've gone blank now. We saw this already in the past with another writer. I just can't remember her name now. But we saw already traits of trying to give the ghostly and the supernatural, give a logical explanation. Anne Radcliffe, that's it, sorry. And then that's where we had the parodies. So now what we have is, for example, in Shirley Jackson, The Haunting of Hill House, which is not exactly like the series on TV, it's a bit different. We have that the house on its own has its own personality. So we have this house as the uncanny. Yeah, now we have, this is a very good example of the uncanny. This house that it's got its own personality, that tracks the people. It has a secret life at night. There is it's got secret passages again. It has secrets, as in stories. The people who lived there had impregnated the house, and they were still there somehow. And then we have the living that have been used as an experiment, and the doctor, the psychologist, trying to actually find out or prove that these ghostly things don't really exist, and it's all in the people's minds, and that's why he chooses a certain audience. So everything very much in the grays, everything like the boundaries, pushing them, but we're still pretty much in the old traditional Gothic of the eerie, of the we don't have an answer. So this is what we kind of have, but adapted to more modern times. So in the contemporary Gothic, that it kind of overlaps with the postmodern Gothic. We have to highlight that, for example, one of the main representatives is Julia Kristeva, and she talks about abjection, and this is something that she talks about in 1982. And as Aldana says, abjection is the powerful feeling of horror at fluids that ooze over fixed bodily boundaries. So because now we're more concerned about the body as well, and this body horror, the Gothic, you will see the stars shifting also to create horror. We're going to see that we're pretty much concerned about what happens with our bodies, and there's no they're not scared anymore talking about biological things like your bodily fluids, menstruation, defecation. So this is what she's talking about. She brings this that up to now was kind of hidden away or not really mentioned because it was gross or disgusting or it made you feel ugh. But this is very important at this time. This contemporary Gothic talks about this powerful feeling of horror at your own body and what comes out of it. So pretty much then we have that in the 2000s, we have this Fred Bottin, who's been studying the Gothic for a long time. He talks about this new label, which is the After Gothic. So this After Gothic comes as a result of computer games and computer-generated worlds, science, lab experiments. Think about Resident Evil. Think about anything that you can think. The new zombies that we have now that are like in this society. So we have. And I'm going to read the quote that he uses, that he says that we have a world of ghosts and monsters rendered palpable. So it's something that we're creating, again, in the comfort of our houses. We can play these video games that are full of horror and they're full of these environments that are really extreme, but we're comfortable from our houses. So here we have that superstitious. This is, again, Fred Bottin says that in these places, in this context, superstitious credulity and imaginative identification are required to realize fictions emotionally. Computer games perform the work of visualization themselves. So again, everything that we see is what goes in our minds, is what we're going to be interpreting. We're going to create all the alternative worlds. So while continuing to play with patterns of anticipation, uncertainty, remember uncertainty is typical of the Gothic, right? And this is all drawn from the basic Gothic plot set out in the Castle of Otranto. So we're gonna close all this period with what we started. So we finished with the Castle of Otranto and we started with the Castle of Otranto. So basically, what do we have here? And probably I could extend a lot more talking about contemporary Gothic and the After Gothic, but this, since the purpose of this series is to now bring you back to your everyday lives, what I will be doing is from next week continue talking about our modern times as well, by bringing some of the characteristics of telling you what are the literary devices, what are the motifs, what are the elements that now, yes, after having seen all the period and after having mentioned you some examples and giving you some explanations, now you're going to understand more all the wording that comes with the Gothic, as not just as a genre but also as a mode, and you see that there's a shift from one to the other. Okay, so I hope that was clear. I don't know if there are questions. I think with Silvia I can talk to you later if you have questions. Si tienes preguntas, ahora hablamos tú y yo. And I hope that you've liked it. Remember, you have free material that you can download on my webpage, gothicalice.com. But what I recommend you download is the Down the Rabbit Hole, because that is a PDF with 3 pages where I tell you all about critical thinking, the 6 questions of critical thinking to start asking yourself questions when you are reading the Gothic. It gives you tips about to overcome your communication fears, 5 tips and 5 ways where the Gothic can actually help you. This is just a starting point in this Gothic journey. Right, so if there are no questions, okay, thank you very much for being here. I hope you have enjoyed it. And again, send me your comments. Tell me if you want me to talk about something in concrete, anything specific. And if not, have a lovely weekend. I hope you've been taking a lot of notes, and I'll see you again on Monday. So bye bye. See you next week, Gothic friends.